I am talking again about the Christmas card theology. What I want you to get out of this is that we get a lot of bad theology from everyday things that seem really nice and quaint and uplifting even, but it's wrong, theologically wrong. And here we are in a world that is so anti-Christian and theologically ignorant. We need to be on top of these things. So I thought, okay, we'll go ahead and look at this again. Okay, first of all, what's wrong with this picture? Yes, Glenn. Oh, you mean the wise men? Yeah, very, very keen of you, because in the reference to the wise men, he was named as a paideon, a child, not a brephos, which would have been an infant. So they think that within the 2 years when they would have apparently stayed there in Bethlehem or in the environment, they had their own house. So Joseph, as a carpenter, probably set up shop there. He did have relatives there because he was from the city of David, which was Bethlehem. So they would have had a place to start off and relatives to take care of them and help them out. So the wise men did not come until he was a child. It's a nice picture, though. What about this one? What's wrong with that picture? That's a common one. Okay, it wasn't in a stable. Well, why do we get the idea that it was a stable? A manger. Now, manger is named, and a manger is a food trough for animals, right? So, I mean, it's understandable that you make that leap from a manger. You got to have animals around because they eat out of a manger. He certainly wasn't born in a manger, but he was placed in a manger. And there's, straw's nice. He was wrapped in swaddling clothes, which was the custom. They would have pieces of cloth and they would wrap around and just keep them bundled. I mean, that was traditional at that time. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just the placement. Well, where else would you put a manger? Well, that's the key, isn't it? And that's what we talk about with what we name the Kataluma theory. Okay, we'll get to that. Well, it's interesting. There were a number of gospels written in the 200s, 150, 200 years after. They were Gnostic. They were way off on some places. But in the infancy gospel of James, the brother of Jesus, supposedly, there are added details to the story that you have in the gospel. And in that story, Joseph would have been a widower with 2 young boys already. And Mary would have been brought up in the temple. So she was well known in the temple. She was honored in the temple. And when she was of age, they wanted to marry her off. And Joseph came up and, it wasn't a love thing at all. It was just an arranged thing according to this infancy gospel of James. And that's where you get a lot of the Christmas card theology from things like that, because he mentions that when they go to Bethlehem, Joseph puts her on a donkey. But there's no donkey mentioned in the Gospels. They usually walked, and we're going to see how they walked. We'll look at the terrain. So a lot of things that we need to go through. Well, was Luke wrong about Quirinius? Quirinius fits in. He was supposedly the governor of Syria, but the timing is all off. And this is what critics bring up. Josephus wrote that Quirinius was governor of Syria from 6 AD. Well, Jesus was born before that. How far back? Well, he was born in the time of Herod. Herod died in 4 BC. So Jesus was born before 1 BC or 0 BC or AD by about 4 years. So within that, he would have had to have been born between 4 and 6 BC, according to the other narratives that you have from the Bible. Matthew wrote that Jesus was born during the reign of Herod, who died in 4 BC. That is a historical marker right there, because the Bible does say in the time of Herod when he was in charge. Luke wrote that Quirinius was governor when the first census was carried out during the reign of Herod. So there's a dilemma there, and there's a lot of research. And I read that again recently, that Quirinius was governor twice. So from about 11 BC, he was co-governor with another man who I think died in office, and so Quirinius was the governor for a while, and had the first census under Quirinius. And that would have been the one that would have called them to Bethlehem, to their city of birth or ancestry. It's a long way to go to register for a census, but that's how they did it at that time. And then Quirinius is known to have been governor around 6 AD. So he was governor twice. And that seems to be verified by the historical data. So that's not a problem, but that's often something that is brought up. Okay, Luke 2, 1-5. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. Well, all the world was a small place at that time. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria, and all went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. Just a note on that legacy of the lineage of David, because you have a genealogy of Jesus in Matthew, and you have a genealogy also in Luke. What do you notice about those genealogies? They differ. One says that his grandfather would have been Matat, Matthew, and the other one says that it would have been Heli, Heli. And you go up all the way back to, I guess David's time, because one line comes down through Nathan, and the other one comes down through Solomon. Both sons of David, but different genealogies. And you think, there's a big contradiction there. But how is that solved? Some of you know. Put them on the chart. One shows the legacy or the lineage of Joseph. The other one gives the lineage of Mary, who is also of David. So it doubles it, and they join together very well. So that's not a problem, but that's often brought up. So don't be put out by that particular argument. It's a non-argument. Yes, all the way, and the other one to Abraham. And that's kind of at a convenience, 14 generations. And that was for memorization sake. Okay, the census of Quirinius was a census of Judea taken by Publius Sulpicius Quirinius, Roman governor of Syria, upon the imposition of direct Roman rule in 6 CE or AD, Christian era. The Gospel of Luke uses it as a narrative means to establish the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem, but the Gospel of Matthew places the birth within the reign of Herod the Great, who died 9 years earlier. So we talked about that particular problem. No satisfactory explanation of the contradiction seems possible, and most scholars think that the Gospel of Luke was in error. Now, did I say that, Yeah, you look at the bottom and you see this is Wikipedia. This is what you're going to hear from media all the way through. Oh, this is a big problem. It's not a problem. Scholars have pretty much delved into that and brought very satisfying information. So we need to be aware of that, because even Wikipedia will get it wrong. Oh my. We need to get Elon Musk on Wikipedia now. Okay, possible solutions. One, Josephus got the date of the census wrong and Luke got it right, because Josephus is the one writing about that in 90 AD or so. The word translated as first in Luke 2:2 should actually be translated as before Quirinius, but there's a better explanation. Quirinius may have been governor of Syria on more than one occasion, and that's the one that is most satisfying and does have good evidence to support it. Okay, what about the inn? Doesn't it mention an inn? Right? The story does mention there was no room in the inn, so they had to go somewhere else. And the poor innkeeper said, well, we've got a stable out back. It's in a cave, and that's where you get the idea of the cave. So was there an inn in the town of Bethlehem? Bethlehem was a little podunk town. It was the city of David. It was outside of Jerusalem. And so it was important, but it was small. They didn't have inns like that in little towns. And the term was kataluma, or kataluma. I tend to say kataluma. Does it refer to an inn or to a guest room? Because there's another word that's specifically for inn, and that's pandokion, Greek word for inn. And that's used in the story of the Good Samaritan, where he takes the Samaritan to a pandokion and pays for him to stay there, where there are rooms and there are people to take care of the guests there. But now we have kataluma. Kataluma was also used in regard to the upper room. Jesus said to his, was it Judas? Because he had the money. And others, Peter, go to this particular man, and he has a kataluma. He has an upper room where we shall have the Passover feast. And it was an upper room, also known as a guest room. Okay, so here we have the verses that deal with Jesus's birth: Luke 1:26-38, Matthew 1:18-25, Luke 2:1-39, and Matthew 2:1-23, where you have the lineage. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths and laid him in a manger. So that manger is the sticking point, because people think there must be animals. And I'm sure there were, but not in the way that you usually think. Okay, here you see a satellite view of Israel. And you see the topography, the mountains. And you see Nazareth there, which is a small village located on a ridge 1,232 feet above sea level. Now remember, the Dead Sea is below sea level. So there's a lot of topographical changes within Israel. 820 feet above the plain, Nazareth was not easily accessible, as we shall see. But they lived it was on a ridge. Nazareth was on a ridge. Now, there have been critics who have said, oh, Nazareth wasn't around at that time. It's barely mentioned. Well, there have been archaeological digs there, and they have dated it to at least before the 1st century AD. So, oh yes, so it must have been there by the first century. But yes, Nazareth does have archaeological verification, And I think there was a Roman town of Sepphoris, which was nearby, and that was one that was being built during that time. And that's where Joseph, as a carpenter, may have had some employment. And of course, Jesus, as being his son, probably would have spent time there in Sepphoris as well with the Greeks. And they were multilingual in that period. So they would have known Greek, they would have known Hebrew, they would have known Aramaic. Aramaic would have been the common form. The Hebrew would have been for their religious memorization and study. Okay, so the angel Gabriel was sent from God to a city in Galilee named Nazareth. And you see the plain of Esdraelon down below, and there's a lot that went on there, a lot of battles around this area. 2 Samuel 7:13 says about the son of David, son of God, referring back to Jesus. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. Gabriel announces to Mary the fulfillment of this 1,000-year-old prophecy. So it goes back to 2 Samuel 7:13, the prophecy of Jesus. Luke joins with this, Luke 1:32-33. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end. Three important things. Jesus' birth was announced by Gabriel, linked to a king, David. So he would fulfill the Davidic covenant concerning a throne, therefore the right to rule, a house, the nation of Israel, and the kingdom, the millennial kingdom. So he's fulfilling prophecy from 1,000 years before. In fact, there are about 500 or so prophecies that involve Jesus. About 250 or so have already been fulfilled in the first coming, and the rest will be fulfilled in the second coming of Jesus, which is also part of the prophecy. Okay, betrothal and marriage. There's a contract, and it's an agreement on compensation to the bride's family. Okay. Payment is made, and a covenant is binding. This is a betrothal period. This is not the marriage yet. But that betrothal may be up to a year, and during that time, anytime they would be together, it would be supervised. No fooling around. No sexual relationship. They are, though, legally husband and wife. There's a commitment already. Now, sometimes that betrothal would be a month or so, but it could last up to a year. And in this case, it seems to have lasted about that time, about a year. So then the marriage comes, and this is the bridegroom would bring the bride to his home. There would be that procession, with the virgins with their lamps and everything like that. They're supposed to come. There would be a procession. It was a happy celebration time. The bride would be adorned at that time. They would have their commitment to each other, parade to the bridegroom's home. They would have a feast, a celebration by the bridegroom's family and friends. So that would be the culmination of that time. So it's a waiting period. And it could be broken, but it would have to be broken with a divorce. So that's why Joseph was thinking of having to divorce Mary when he found out that she was pregnant. And so anyway, Mary and Joseph leave Nazareth for Judea, descending 820 feet from their home on the Nazareth Ridge to the plain of Esdraelon. They proceed to the Jordan Valley, bypassing Samaria. Now you see those gray lines. Those would be the main roads. Those are already established, the crossroads. And the one down there at Mount Carmel would go along the coast all the way, and you can go along the coast and then back up to Jerusalem. But they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? What is directly to the right over there. Yeah, mountains, but also Samaria. They didn't go through Samaria, did they? They didn't like that. So they'd have to go around. So they go all the way down the ridge, and then they go up the other side so that they can go north. Or I guess since we're looking at it this way, they're going to be going to the east of everything. And they keep on going. So you see the Jordan Valley. And by the way, these maps are set up so that to your left, that would be north. To your right, that would be south. So we're looking, the plains of Moab would be the east, and Samaria would be the west. So, but these are actual topographical maps made from the satellites. Traveling from Nazareth to Judea, Mary and Joseph avoid Samaria and arrive at the plains of Moab, from where they retrace the path of Israel's Jordan crossing. And then they go down to Jericho, or I guess up to Jericho, because now they're going up. And they have to go through the Wadi Kilt, through which Mary and Joseph probably passed as they follow the Roman road, ascending 3,500 feet in the 17 miles from Jericho to Bethlehem. So they go down from Nazareth, up to the plain, across along the Jordan, which is not as rough. And then they get to Jericho, and now they've got to go up 3,500 feet. And they're walking. They're not on donkeys, most likely. Mary and Joseph complete their 80-mile journey from Nazareth, ascending the 3,500 feet from Jericho to Jerusalem. Okay? So that's the journey. And you can see that it's pretty rough, especially when you're 9 months pregnant, as Mary was. Common assumptions, not supported by Scripture. And this is the neat part. This is what you need to kind of pay attention to. The stories have Joseph and Mary arriving in Bethlehem at night and in a hurry because she's ready to give birth. And they come to a local inn and they're desperate, but there's no room in the inn. So the innkeeper put them in a stable out back where all the animals were kept. So Jesus was born the night they arrived because it was such a rough time. It was probably raining and storming as well, right? And so Jesus was born in a manger. The only thing that is verifiable there from the Scripture is manger. All of the rest comes from the manger. And, well, kataluma, which is interpreted by others as the inn. And if you have an inn, you have to have an innkeeper, right? And the innkeeper had to say, well, there's no room because they weren't in an inn. They weren't in a room. They weren't inside, according to the stories. So he had to put them out to the stable, which was perhaps a cave. Okay. Mary was alone when Jesus was born. Because, what's Joseph going to do? Boil water? He wouldn't know. He's just a guy. They don't know what to do. So she was all alone. That's the story, right? Now, this is a medieval painting. So, the characters are dressed differently, but you have them coming, and this is the idea of a type of stable, a lean-to where animals would be kept for those who would stop at the inn in Bethlehem, a little town outside of the big city of Jerusalem. Well, Bethlehem revisited the journey. Joseph and Mary arrived in Bethlehem at night. Wrong. We're going to go one by one through these now. Why? Well, look at Scripture. And it came about while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. It's not a rush. She was there. Traveling 10 to 15 miles a day, there would be no need for them to arrive at night and urgently seek accommodations. They had made this trip many times. They knew how to pace it out. They'd go up for the different feasts, and so they would have. This is all part of their tradition. Joseph and Mary arrived at a local inn. Wrong. Why? The Greek word kataluma is mistranslated as inn. For inn, Luke used pandikion. So Luke is one talking about kataluma. And remember with the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan story, pandikion, Luke 10:34. Same gospel, same writer, different words on purpose. In the Gospels, kataluma means guest room or upper room. Jesus celebrated the Passover in a kataluma. You see that in Mark 14:14, as well as Luke 22:11. So those are key words. You'll get this presentation. You might want to look up these passages and kind of reflect on all of this. Guest room suggests that it was an ancestral family home. So we're talking about relatives. Joseph was from the house of David. So was Mary. Bethlehem was a key point. They would have had relatives there. And relatives, even if it's a busy time of a census, would make room wherever they could. But the guest room was full. No room in the kataluma. Why? Because they were young, or at least she was. And so you probably have older people in the honored guest room, which was often an upper room. And I'll show you a picture a little bit later of what that might look like. Question asked by a Lebanese man of New Testament scholars, quote, why would Joseph of the lineage of David in the city of his family's origin have to seek shelter in an inn to be turned out into a stable? And this is a reflection of Middle Eastern culture. The extended family, the hospitality, which they are known for. They would not have done that, especially when she's ready to give birth, within days. She would not have been turned out. Others would have taken her in. Okay, no room in the inn. The innkeeper put them in a stable. That too, of course, is wrong. No inn, therefore no innkeeper, no stable. We've talked about that. Western style stables were not found in Israel. You don't have that in Israel. What do you have? You do have places for animals. Animals were accommodated on the lower level of a home, hence the availability of a manger for the baby as a safe place. He's not going to move around much, especially if he's all bundled up with the swaddling clothes. Another one, Jesus was born the night they arrived. That's wrong too, as we said. Zechariah and Elizabeth, whom Mary had visited recently, lived in En-Kerim, less than a 2-hour walk from Bethlehem. They could have stayed there. If Mary was in such a hurry to give birth, they would have stopped there and given birth with Elizabeth around. Had they walked with them on their way to Bethlehem? Yeah, Elizabeth could have walked with them. Said, hey, we've got family there too. Since Jesus was born while they were there, Joseph and Mary would have been residing for several days in a family home. That's very likely. That's what you would do in the Middle East at that time. What about this? Jesus was born in a manger. Well, that's kind of difficult. Birth in a manger is not a physical possibility, but the text reads, she laid him in a manger. Very likely. A baby laid in a manger wrapped in cloths was a normal sight, one that did not surprise the shepherds. Plus, they had to have a sign, right? The sign was, you shall find this baby in a manger. So if it's in a house, then it would have to be a manger that would be visible. Or if they're checking around all the different areas, and I'll show you what the stable would have looked like, or the animal containment would have looked like, and they would have had to look in to see, okay, is there a baby in a manger? And so they're going all around, I guess, in this town. Wouldn't have been too long, not that many houses. What astounded them was the sight of the one the angels had proclaimed as Christ the Lord appearing as a baby. What about this? Mary was alone when Jesus was born. Well, that's wrong. Since Mary gave birth in a home, she would have been surrounded by the women of the family. They would have taken part. Get out of here, guys. We've got it. Had Elizabeth pleaded with Mary to have the baby at her home nearby? Did Mary and Joseph insist on reaching Bethlehem to fulfill Micah's prophecy? Micah 5:2. She'll be born in Bethlehem. That's probably why they went. They could have stayed with Elizabeth. Now, what about the features of this home? This would be a middle-class home, first century. You see that you have the family room. Now, I'm going to show you some pictures of some of these homes, a particular home that has been restored. You have a family room, and that's where you do everything. You do the cooking, and then you pull out for the night. You pull out your sleeping mats, and you find place on the floor. And that corner up there would have been the guest room. So you have the perhaps even upper level. I'll show you in the next picture. But that would have been the kataluma. That's where the older people would have been. The older guests would have had the honored space. And then the lower level for the animals. That would have been attached, maybe a lean-to. And with the animals in there, it would have created warmth in the winter from the animals, the heat from them coming up into the other room, as well as, I guess, smells too. Got to take them both. But this is a representation of a typical house in Capernaum from the time of Christ. And you see that upper room there. That would have been the kataluma. That would have been the place for the guests. They would have gone up the stairs in this particular house. You see a stable out there off the courtyard. Now, this would be a nicer house. You have the courtyard there. You have the stables. You have the mangers there. Why in the manger? Well, was she giving birth out there? Was that a more private place to get away from the rest of the family? Here's a picture of a larger stable. You see the place where the mangers would have been for the animals, part of a stable. Probably a stone manger, which was representative of that time. Luke 2:7, and laid him in a manger because there is no room in the guest room. Okay, no place to put a baby because you've got other people staying there, and baby cries, right? Going to keep people up. So they probably had them in the great room, and then to keep the baby secreted, and also Mary to give her some privacy. They'd be just on the other side of the wall. Okay, here's some views of an early 19th century home near Bethlehem. 19th century. It shows what it would have looked like at the time of the first century. You have the family room, the upper room. No, this is the family room, the upper level, because there's a lower level for the stable. This is just the family room. And you put everything here. Then there would be a lower area. The door open to view the lower level where the family housed animals in cold weather, located under the family room. This room kept the home warm in winter and also served as an intruder warning system, because it'd come through and the animals would make all kinds of noise if there would be intruders. So you have your alarm system. You don't have to go ahead and get Simply Safe or ADT or anything like that. The family room, sleeping mats were stored on the lower shelf where there's that big pot now. And then they would be pulled out and they would lay down their mats and sleep in the family room. Dual purpose, kind of nice. Note the oven and the wardrobe. They would have had their clothes, hanging up. Simple way. And then the lower area of the house where the animals were accommodated. And here's another picture. Since the guest room, Kataluma, was already occupied when Mary and Joseph arrived at their relative's home. This is a supposition, but it makes sense. They were accommodated in the family room with easy access to the animals on the lowest level where there would be a manger. So they would be staying in the general room, and then Mary would have her privacy and go out to the manger area, and that's where Jesus would have been able to sleep. And you have the fields around where the shepherds would have heard, and they would have come in. They would have been keeping their sheep even at that time, and they heard the angels come and sing to them. Glory to God. And when the days of their purification, according to the law of Moses, were completed, they brought him up to Jerusalem to present him to the Lord. Luke 2:22-39. So from Bethlehem to Jerusalem, it's just a short walk, I think about 6 miles. And they would have taken him to the temple. This is a reconstruction, kind of a model. Ellen, did you see this up there? Yeah, right. It's just kind of all. Now it is. It wasn't at that time. Bethlehem was much smaller. Okay. It's much different. But this is a model, kind of about the size of this room, I guess. The court of the Gentiles, where Mary and Joseph were met by Simeon and Anna. That's where they would have met, and they would have given their prophecy over the baby. And then they would have, now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he that is born King of the Jews? And so they would have come on down from Persia. They were Zoroastrian Magi, wise men, philosophers. And having heard the king, they went their way, and lo, the star went on before them until it stood over where the child was. Kind of a neat little way. Some think that it was a planetary conjunction, others a special star that was created for that time. There are some neat stories about that. Okay, to finalize this, the baby is Messiah. You have confirmations from Elizabeth leaping in the womb. The baby John, before his birth, gave testimony to that as part of prophecy. The shepherds coming and hearing from the angels, from Simeon and Anna in the temple, and their prophetic presentation to who Jesus was and how important he was. And then the Magi from the east. All of these as verifications. All of it scriptural, all of it fitting in with the true story. So summarizing, Mary and Joseph met and lived in Nazareth. They went to Bethlehem to register for the census. Joseph was a descendant of David, and therefore it was likely that he had family in Bethlehem. This is a much better summary than the Christmas card theology. Mary's cousin Elizabeth lived only 2 hours distance from Bethlehem, so they could have stayed with them if they needed to. Mary gave birth to Jesus while in Bethlehem. There's no room in the guest room, so they probably stayed in the family room, and Mary gave birth there, surrounded by other women relatives. Comforting. She wasn't alone. They wouldn't have left her alone. The stable was attached to the house, and the manger was a convenient place to place a baby. So that's the Kataluma theory.